Sabrina 2000s comic issue 35. We start out with Quigley telling Sabrina to come back to her seat on the plane because she can see the Irish countryside out the window. She thinks all the different shades of green are beautiful. Predictably, it turns out Quigley's Irish, and that's the only reason they're on this trip. Why did he drag her along with him and force her to be alone with him? Just a few days ago, Quigley got a call from his long-lost relative saying he had inherited his ancestral home in Ireland, called Castle Quigley. Can people find out your real name and call you claiming there's now a castle in your name for you to go to? Oh good, they were skeptical of a potential scam. And then the paperwork arrived. And, using her expertise as a real estate saleswoman, Zelda confirmed that the castle had passed to him. So the family decided that Quigley had to fly there and investigate, rather than just staying home because he doesn't need a castle. Also, wouldn't you have to pay taxes on any property you own? Maybe that doesn't include a castle that's been in your family for generations? Because if it did, he'd have to give it up or else go bankrupt. I guess Sabrina's really excited to see Ireland, to the point where she's fine with being the one chosen to protect Quigley, who immediately proves that her being with him is a terrible idea for a story because he thinks it'll be good for her to be away from her family's casual magic. Why are they bad? Oh right, he's jealous of them and afraid of them. Sadly, we don't get to see Sabrina looking annoyed at him for saying this. They go on a train that crosses the rural landscape, and finally show up in a village closest to the castle, where they board a trap, a traditional horse-drawn carriage, for the final leg. Won't Ireland have cars too, everywhere? They think everyone in the country is being friendly, generalizing them without a second thought. And the guy in the horse-drawn carriage is terrified and coughs at having to go to Castle Quigley. Because no one goes there because of rumors that the place is haunted by the ghost of the guy that started an ancient feud between the Quigleys and some other family. Quigley never heard of that, and they're thrown out of the taxi trap and expected to walk the rest of the way. Quigley says the steering wheel on the car he conveniently got is on the wrong side, and complains that everyone's driving on the wrong side of the road. I guess they got permission from the Witches' Council to not erase Quigley's memory of witches too. They let Quigley know about witches. They say the castle's a run-down fixer-upper. Quigley sure is stubborn and brave to insist on coming here anyways after being warned not to. But he does have a witch to protect them. An idiot witch who probably won't just warp them both home at the first sign of danger or get rid of the danger. I knew it was stupid that she was sent with him. Quigley says that the place seems structurally sound and looks at a painting of a guy who looks just like him, Seamus Quigley, and says he's the one all the fuss is about. Merely saying this with a smile causes the ghost to go through the painting and threaten to hit him with his club, as I wonder why he hasn't been forced to go to the afterlife world and stay there, instead of getting to stay on Earth and bother people. Quigley complains that the door is jammed. And oh good, Sabrina uses magic to zap the ghost, being a badass. The disgusting piece of shit complains that she broke her promise to not use witchcraft during their vacation. He only likes her in spite of her being a witch. And Sabrina says sorry, which he doesn't deserve. She deserves an apology for being bitched out for protecting him. She should have warped them both home. But I can't blame her for wanting revenge on the ghost first. The ghost then immediately warms up to Quigley when he finds out his name, and says that he knew there was something he liked about him. I thought he already knew he was related to him and didn't care, because Quigley looks just like him. So obviously he should have known they were related. This is the worst use of the Generation Xerox family resembling trope. It's nice of the ghost to put his hand on his shoulder. So far he only deserves to be called the Ghost, because that's all he's acting like. He doesn't have a personality. Quigley happily agrees to help him settle this business with the Callahans when he has no reason to hate them. Oh good, he says he's gonna end this feud once and for all. So he's not a hypocrite, he was just letting the ghost think he's on his "no, that'd be smart." Instead he says in front of an angry ghost that he's gonna try to make peace with the head of the Callahan family, who'd probably just punch him and refuse. Seamus, rather than explaining himself properly like a real person, says that this feud is centuries old, so he can't just waltz in here and make it go away. He's probably right, but I wish he wasn't opposed to it. Naturally, Quigley wants to try, when the ghost could easily discourage him by telling him that the Callahans did a bunch of horrible things to his family. It'd be so satisfying if it turned out one of Quigley's relatives was a witch. I bet if there is going to be a twist, it'll be that the Callahans are witches. Sabrina's told that she better stay in the castle with the angry ghost that tried to beat him up. The ghost tells him where the house of Callahan is. I guess he's only telling him the truth because he assumes Quigley will end up fighting with them regardless. He's given his stick and only wants to use it as a walking stick. By this point, I'm questioning why this ghost who always speaks perfect English is insisting on using a few Irish words just because the story takes place in Ireland, when he could easily use English while he's at it. But maybe that's realistic, I don't know. How old is Seamus? If he's the one who started the whole feud, wouldn't he explain why? Shouldn't Quigley be questioning why the ghost didn't freak out too much at Sabrina revealing witchcraft? Maybe he assumes that ghosts learn that witches exist after they die, because the people working in the afterlife world are nice enough to tell them for no reason, or maybe they just do it to freak them out. He hopes Quigley won't end up killed, as I wonder if his lack of reaction to Sabrina being a witch is foreshadowing that the family in the feud are witches, which would be a parallel between Quigley's hatred of Sabrina, her magic. Sabrina isn't questioning his lack of fear of her either, and just takes his hand and tells him to show her where to find a few brooms because they have a lot of work to do. Doesn't she realize he wants to keep the castle maintained? He has no guests over most of the time. Lucky for Sabrina, the ghost is smart enough to not try to attack her again, because she can just zap him again. I don't see why she didn't just make him disappear entirely instead of thinking a mere zap would suffice against a ghost. He shouldn't even be affected by electricity because he has no physical body. She's probably holding a force field that's only looking like a hand. A short time later, down the path, Quigley politely says good day to a woman who's doing some planting. She says good day to him too. I guess she's a Callahan. He says that he's a gardener too, and warns her that she's gonna have a tough time growing anything next to this wall because it blocks out the afternoon sun. So she'd be better off digging up that scraggly bush over there and planting it in that spot. She says that's a blackthorn bush, where legend says the fairies live. So no self-respecting Irish person, apparently, would dare dig it up and risk their anger. Is it racist for the comic to portray all Irish people as superstitious? Or at least have her say this? This trope seems familiar. Sabrina's version of Earth sure is weird. To be fair, there's witches on this Earth, and fairies exist in this comic. So maybe the Irish of Sabrina's Earth are very justified in believing in supernatural things, because they happened to witness them much more than everyone else, and wrote them down into legends so that being forced to forget what they saw wouldn't solve the problem. The woman tells Quigley that he's right about this wall, and it's been trouble for her family these many generations. Predictably, she tells Quigley that it's a spite wall built centuries ago by a bitter man named Seamus, put here to separate his family from the Callahans. And Quigley's actually smart enough to not say his name in front of her. A week later, Quigley puts the last of the wall in the wagon of the horse-drawn carriage. Fortunately, the guy in the green hat apologizes, again, for mistreating him earlier, and says that's a fine thing he's done. He says it's hard to believe such a simple thing caused so much grief. I'll say, this is a comic about witches. I'd expect witchcraft to be involved. It would have been epic if the Callahans had been a family of witches, and then I'd get to see magic a lot. But no. Sabrina complains that they spent all week breaking down the wall, and the castle's still a mess, and their flight home is tomorrow. Quigley's invited into the woman's home for scones and tea. He blushes and says that he needs to talk with her. Oh, that implies that he has a crush on that woman. But he can't stay in Ireland anyways, because that would change the status quo of the comic. Wouldn't he hate having to give up his greenhouse? Why in the world did Sabrina's aunts miss him? Oh, they're talking about Sabrina and Quigley's not in the car. That makes more sense. Quigley's staying with Helen Callahan. If the writer had the creative freedom he should have had, Quigley would never come back to Sabrina's house to live there ever again. That would be awesome. I know he might miss his greenhouse, but he can get another one. I say this because the annoying text on the side asks us if we want to see more of Quigley's new life in Ireland. No, I don't. And he better stay there. He contributes nothing positive to the comic. Anytime he's nice, I could see Hilda being nice instead. Hilda and Zelda somehow suggest that Quigley come for a visit sometime when he's done fixing up the castle. It's nice of them to want to meet Helen. But I can't help but being annoyed at the ghost being drawn looking at the audience and the text talking directly to us. So, why did Seamus build the wall? Is the story seriously ending without explaining why the feud actually started? He won't build a wall for no reason. In the next story, while Salem's excited to go on a trip with Zelda to the Dude Ranch, he's told that he's not coming with them, because Salem always does stuff with magic that makes people suspicious of the family. She's probably right, but we've seen that Hilda and Zelda are casual with magic too. But apparently the rest of them have more restraint. Oh, good. We get to see what they're talking about. That's interesting to look at. Zelda says that Salem went surfing in the hotel swimming pool. This seems familiar to me. They do realize he can erase people's memories, right? So he just do that for the people at the hotel. None of this matters. He also pointlessly took a shortcut over the Great Wall of China with an escalator. He can erase memories. And no one would believe them about it. Wouldn't this not have any consequences then? He acts offended, and they surprisingly look unhappy about it. Which makes me wonder if right after this he's going to reveal it was all a ploy to try to manipulate them into changing their minds, and he's still hopeful he'll get to go with them. Or already has a plan to go with them anyways. The next day at the ranch, it turns out Salem's going to accompany them anyways because he turned himself into a horse as a disguise, saying that he's entitled to a vacation too because the rest of them go on one. I don't remember ever going on vacation, let alone visiting all the different places these people do. So that's what they do with all the money they have. I'm guessing someone's going to try to ride Salem. Also, wouldn't the workers at the ranch immediately know that they don't have a horse that looks like him? A guy says this is exactly the kind of horse he's been looking for. I guess they buy new horses all the time. Salem doesn't want to move for him when he tries to ride him. And then he gets stung in the rear by a bee, even though it first saw him from the front. Why did getting stung cause Salem to run? I could understand if he was running from a whole swarm of bees. Later, Sabrina fortunately asks him if he's okay and what happened. And Salem complains that the big oaf rode him for miles, while he was in pain from the bee sting the whole time. He doesn't deserve this much of a punishment. It turns out Hilda was the man that was riding him all along, and she did this to get him to go away. And there's a narrative cheat, because it's revealed that Zelda was the bee, but she clearly didn't have her Zelda head when we saw it sting Salem. I'm glad Hilda apologizes to Sabrina for this and has a good excuse. She doesn't want Salem to ruin their vacation and force them to go home again. Salem was pretty selfish for doing that even once, when he knows they're trying to hide that they're witches, so he should get punished. But being forced to run for miles and miles while you're in pain from a bee sting is pretty cruel. I'm glad it was Hilda though, so there was a good reason for Salem being made to suffer, because I thought it was some guy who thought he was dealing with a regular horse and obliviously committed what would normally be animal abuse. And it made me wonder how many other horses he exhausted like that. But I always assumed that the reason Salem was so tired out was that he's not really used to running for a long time, and he's out of shape at worst. Maybe Salem wouldn't have been figured out so quickly as being him, if he had the good sense to not keep the same color that he's known for. In the next story, Sabrina writes in her diary about being at another camp, confusingly referring to the diary as you, and says she made a new friend who is special, which probably means a witch. It'd be kind of boring if the whole story was narration instead of dialogue to get you invested. The fact that the whole diary is written in handwriting doesn't help either. Who the hell uses handwriting when they don't have to? That's pretentious, especially of someone so young. She says that it all started with the camp's canoe race, and her partner was Chloe. Well, that's boring and cliche. She and Chloe were so good at canoeing that they didn't think they needed to practice until the day before the race when they saw Jem's tough girl partner who's really good at paddling. Jem must be outright obsessed with competing with Sabrina. What are the chances she'd be at the summer camp too? Wouldn't she be at a rich girl summer camp, or doing rich girl things? Why would she separate herself from all of her rich girl stuff and activities for a whole summer? If the real threat is this tough girl with the terrible haircut, then Jem didn't even need to be in this plot. When Sabrina and Chloe practiced canoeing at night, Sabrina had to make sure no one saw them. Because apparently your freedom in camp is so restricted, you can't do anything without supervision. Sabrina uses witchcraft to cover the lake with a mist. But then it got too thick because she can't do anything right, and she couldn't see a thing. Logically, oh good, she did light up the lake with her magic again. But not before she bumped into something with the canoe. Why won't she cast a spell to make sure the mist never appeared right in front of her canoe instead? Also, that mist is gray like smoke. Wouldn't just seeing the mist make someone suspicious of magic and want to have it investigated anyways? she'd be better off surrounding her canoe with an invisibility field. Then they hugged each other when they saw a giant dragon coming out of the lake. That has to be the product of a spell that recently put it there because of another witch. There's no way a lake would have enough food to feed a giant monster. Also, if something was too big, it wouldn't be able to move around because it'd be too heavy. That'd be a problem with King Kong, which is why it has to be magical. What would a witch have to gain in summoning this dragon? Maybe it came here through another realm portal that was put in the lake for a witch to visit one of her relatives, and she forgot about it and left it open. But if it was in the water, it'd be an impractical portal from the other side, because there'd always be water rushing out of it from the lake when it's used. Sabrina and Chloe rushed to bed terrified, and the next day, Sabrina hoped she had just imagined the monster. What, her and Chloe both? They were pretty close up to it. This was just an excuse to have the panel explaining that one time Chloe was wrong about someone being in love with her when really he just needed glasses. It's good to have a character be wrong sometimes, because it makes her feel more relatable and fleshed out. On the day of the canoe race, the sea monster turned Sabrina's canoe into a speedboat because the canoe was on top of its back, and the thing was carrying it to the finish line to help. So not only did they get to win with a supernatural event, but Sabrina didn't look bad for cheating. This thing doesn't look anything like the Loch Ness Monster, but I'm sure the idea of monster in a lake for no reason came from that. But seriously, there won't be enough fish in a lake to keep it alive, let alone big fish. Maybe the sea monster came out of the lake enough to eat birds or something. But if it ever came out of the lake, if it got spotted even once, it'd risk someone obsessively trying to find it, like they try to find a Loch Ness Monster. So it'd be caught on camera eventually, like by a camera left out and on all night. It'd have been discovered by now and become a tourist attraction. We have Google Maps, satellites. Actually, why would I have a problem with being discovered if it's so friendly? I bet it's lonely. Well, if it wanted to be discovered, it would have gone to civilization. Surprisingly, Sabrina and Chloe felt like they couldn't keep the gold trophy they got, which makes sense because their victory wasn't earned. Gem did deserve to win, but still, they'd have no reason to be satisfied with the trophy, so they gave it to the dragon. I guess Sabrina thought she had to summon Mist to get its attention because that seems like a false correlation to me. It was nice of Chloe to appreciate being licked by that monster, even if it was unrealistic. The story ends with a sea dragon in Sabrina's pool because she followed her home. We'll never see it again. And Sabrina wonders how to tell her aunts about her. So, there's no explanation for why a sea dragon was in a mortal Earth lake? Well, this story is stupid. The first story, by Mike Gallagher, is about Quigley and Sabrina going to Ireland to investigate a castle that Quigley inherited from his long-lost relatives. Why were they lost? And he ends up befriending a member of the Callahan family that used to feud with his own, by getting rid of the stone wall separating her family from his in a very poor way because you could just walk around the wall. It was just symbolic. Sabrina's only useful because she zaps the ghost that tried to smack Quigley with a club and said Quigley's name, getting the ghost to warm up to him because he apparently needed help to figure out that a guy that looks just like him is his descendant. The ghost wasn't even necessary because Quigley was told about the family feud before he came to the castle. But I guess he needed extra motivation to try to fix the feud because the ghost was talking about it too. This story looks a lot better in retrospect because it turns out Quigley actually does stay in Ireland. Awesome! Also, he doesn't break up with his girlfriend. But again, when you keep the status quo too much, you have no reason to believe it will stay changed. The second story, by Angelo, is about Salem disguising himself as a horse to try to go on vacation with Sabrina's family, even though they hate that he keeps making people suspicious of them from obvious uses of magic whenever they go on vacation. Something he wouldn't do. He knows they don't want people to find out they're witches. He goes to the ranch anyways because he thinks he's entitled to a vacation, and ends up wanting to go home because Hilda, disguised as a man, rides him for miles after Zelda stings him in bee form, and I guess casts a spell to compel him to keep running. I don't see why he couldn't have stopped himself long before he'd get exhausted. Salem was talking as if the guy on him forcibly took control of him and made him ride for miles and miles. But a horse can stop anytime. The final story is about Sabrina writing in her diary that she saw a sea monster in a lake when she went to camp with Chloe, and it carried her canoe to the finish line when Jem was about to win the race thanks to her tough girl partner, that she was very lucky to have. There's no explanation for why a sea monster was in a mortal lake. and stayed in it when it wouldn't be able to survive in here, which makes the story look dumb. It makes sense if it was in a witch camp, but then Chloe couldn't have been in the story. So that was worth it, even if the plot could have easily been in the other realm and made a better story overall, because it explained why there was a monster in the lake. A big problem with the story was that it was nothing but narration. So there was no dialogue to give you much character interaction and get you invested. Which means this was probably an easy story to write by not requiring any dialogue to think up and being made out of time skips. But it's worth not having to deal with Gem's dialogue. And the story didn't actually need dialogue. Although if it had it, the sea monster could have explained how it got in the lake and why it was put there. But Sabrina's narration could have done that too.